Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Bo again. So tonight we're going to talk about Bernie, Trump, and Russians. Dun dun dun! Everybody be scared. So the debate right now is, would the Russians really do this? Of course they would. Of course they would. Would they try to interfere in our elections? Of course they would. They would try to influence them. Every country does. And we try to do it to other countries. Of course. Would they really support Bernie? Probably. I mean, that makes sense. Why? For the same reason they supported Trump. The effect, from their point of view, isn't going to be any different. Not really. Trump's a little bit better for them, but not by much. The reality is, intelligence agencies, they attempt to influence other countries' leadership. That's what they do. They try to advance their nation's foreign policy. That's their job. Having somebody of similar interests in the leadership of another country, that's beneficial to them. Let's do it this way. Why were the Russians in Afghanistan? Leadership questions. 78, I think, there was a coup, brought communists to power. They wanted to back them. Why were we in Panama? Leadership questions. Why were we in Iraq? Leadership questions. What's the issue with North Korea? Leadership questions. If we will go to war over it, we will certainly devote some covert resources. The idea that it's not happening is just saying, I do not understand the international stage. Okay? Of course it's happening. Why would they support Bernie? Why would the Russians support Bernie? The Republicans right now have two answers to this. One is that he's a socialist. Okay. First, he's actually not. None of his policies that he's stated are socialist. But whatever, even let's just say he is, it's not the Soviet Union anymore. It's Russia, and Russia isn't socialist. That doesn't even make sense. The other is that he would be easier for Trump to beat. You're thinking like an American. One of the smartest things I've ever heard about organized crime was a guy who spent a lot of time studying them. And he said the difference between the Italian mafia, Italian organized crime, and Russian organized crime could be summed up by the fact that Italian organized crime sat around and played poker, and the Russians sat around and played chess. The Russians don't gamble. They come up with multiple avenues to get what they want. They would support both sides. So what do they want? That's the question. We keep trying to force our motives onto them. What do they actually want? Do they want to degrade our democracy? No, they don't care. They want to influence our stance in foreign affairs. They want to have somebody that is beneficial to them when it relates to foreign affairs. They do not care what happens domestically. Bernie is the peace candidate, right? He's the guy speaking out against the military and industrial complex. He's the guy saying he wants to reduce our footprint overseas. He's the guy saying he wants to reduce the frequency with which we force project. Yeah, of course. I mean, all that's good for the Russians. It's also good for the American people. Doesn't have to be either or. Why did they support Trump? Because on the international stage, he's incompetent. He can be led around by the nose, which is beneficial to them. That's it. There's no great mystery here. This happens in every election. It's nothing shocking, really. The real question at the end of the day is whether or not the candidates themselves have the integrity to not play ball with them, to not be influenced by that support, to not allow their policies to be changed by that support, to not, well, I'd sit there and listen. That's the real question. It deals with the integrity of the candidates involved. U.S. counterintelligence, it doesn't matter how many resources you grant them, they're not going to be able to stop other nations from trying to influence the election. They're not going to be able to do that. The best they can do is keep tabs on the candidates themselves and make sure that they're not being influenced directly, because then that is a national security threat. Now, they've done a pretty good job of this over the years. They probably won't do very well this election because, the Senate stopped measures to help them, and then their leadership was just gutted. So they're probably going to do really bad at it this time around. But I would suggest not dismissing the idea that the Russians support Bernie. He's the peace candidate. The same reason you support him, if you do, is the reason they do. I would suggest that there are a couple other Democratic candidates who, if they had a chance, they'd also be getting support from Russia. And there probably are a couple others that are getting support. It hasn't been identified yet, because I can think of a couple more candidates that would be getting passive support. Now, this doesn't mean that they're working with them. It doesn't mean that they're meeting them in hotels. It doesn't mean that they're promising them anything. It just means that the Russians would like them in a position of authority because their foreign policy isn't combative. That's kind of a no-brainer. It really boils down to, well, like Richard Nixon said, is your president a crook? Anyway, it's just a thought. Y'all have a good night.